Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to NRW. I'm your host today, Ron Medina, and I thank you very much for joining me here today because today I'm reviewing the movie Meteor. Now, when you look at this poster, it definitely will give you the impression that this is going to be pretty much a straightforward disaster film, and this is actually the furthest from that because the movie itself is actually a very isolated and a pretty introverted story, and the events that you see on the poster, they actually take place 10 years before where the story picks up from. So there's really no meteors at all that you see in the film, with the exception of one particular scene where you do see some of that, and some newsreels that you see from when it actually had occurred 10 years prior to the events of this movie. So as far as the disaster aspect of the film is concerned, this movie is not that at all. And actually, this is actually a really interesting thing for me to point out, that I think it actually worked in the favor of this movie for a number of different reasons, which I'll be getting into this review. But the one thing I want to highlight for you first and foremost is that I'm not going to get into any spoilers here, because the way the film has turned out as far as how the events starts to unfold, I actually started to appreciate the story more and more, because I've actually seen the movie, believe it or not, 3 different times, and each time I saw the film, there was actually something that I took away from this movie that I actually liked more each time when I started to watch it. I will be the first to admit, though, that I do believe this is not going to be a film for everybody, because if you're expecting a disaster film, you're not going to get that with this movie. It's a very character-driven story, and as I said, it's a pretty isolated story as well. So there's not a large cast in this film. I think it's a total of 8 actors, if I'm not mistaken, all together in this movie. And there are a lot of things that I've taken away from this film that I really did truly enjoy. But I will get into a little bit of the plot, and then, of course, I'll get into my positive, and then the negatives, and then, of course, my rating. The story of Meteor follows a man by the name of Liam Marshall, played by the actor Robert Keith. We find out that he's been living on his own for the last 10 years, ever since the events of the Meteor, and he's also a widow, and along the way we discover how his wife died. And he comes across the very first person he's seen in 10 years, where a young lady runs across his property who's clearly running away from somebody and is also pretty wounded as well. So she manages to sneak into his home, and when he comes across her, he tells her she's got to leave, and she begs him to stay. He says no, kicks her out, then has a change of heart and allows her back in. And then we come to find out that these group of men are actually chasing her, are mercenaries who are hired by some pretty powerful people to look for anybody to eat. And there's a whole thing about that as well too, where ever since the meteor had hit, the resources as far as food, water, gasoline, and everything else is concerned is very, very limited, and people got desperate to survive. They started eating each other, and now that's become accepted by a group of people who want to partake in that. And these powerful people had hired these mercenaries to find anybody that they can pretty much take in and groom them to do whatever they want and potentially eat them for the most part. So there's a whole thing about that as well too. And along the way, we discover with this young woman, Hannah, whom Liam takes in, she's actually looking for her brother, and she believes that he's out located in this location in Colorado. But in order for her to get there, she has to have these transportation papers, because without that, then she's pretty much screwed, and she's got to be able, and she won't be able to get to that destination. So, and it's also very difficult to get those paperwork too. So Liam knows somebody that can help them out to pretty much forge these papers for her to get access to transportation to get to Colorado. And then along the way, they're being chased by these mercenaries, and it pretty much becomes a story of survival, redemption, among other things as well too. There's a lot that goes on in this movie that I'm really purposely leaving out there, so I'm pretty much giving the bare bones about what the overall plot is all about there, and so hopefully that'll be enough to entice you to at least become interested into checking out the film here. But now, since we've already got over the plot, let's get into my positives. The first positive for me are with the actors, the first of which is the actor Robert Keith, who's the star of the film. This is an actor that I became familiar with mainly because of the work he's done with the writer and director of this movie, Meteor, in Brett Bentman, who had also directed and written The Rodeo Thief, Buckskin, and Honor Among Thieves, just to name a few that Robert Keith is also featured in. And in those movies that I just mentioned there, it actually plays a pretty, I would say, almost like over-the-top character, if you will, in each of those movies, where he's actually really good at that. But in this particular film, it's the total opposite from what I'm used to seeing in the previous work that he's done with Brett. And in this film, he's playing a much more sad character, a little more reserved, and nowhere near as brash as I've seen him before in the other films that he's done with Brett, where he's actually a very low-key type of character. And one thing I also did appreciate about this movie when it comes to Robert Keith's performance, I meant to say, in this film, is that you actually do get to see some really genuine character moments in this film. There's one particular scene in the movie where he shares with the actress Olivia Nash, who plays the character of Hannah in this movie, where it's a 7-minute sequence through. There's no cuts. It's literally a shot all the way through. And they're going back and forth and sharing their stories and going through their backgrounds and getting a really deep understanding of each of these characters. And I wonder how much of it's improvised and how much of it's actually word for word from the script, because I actually got a chance to speak with the director, Brett Bentman, and he did say that was a one shot all the way through. It was only one take, and it looks beautiful. It's beautifully done, in my opinion. And the one thing I will also point out too with this movie is that it's a very slow-paced film. This is not a very fast-moving movie, but I do believe it serves well for the purpose of the story, because you have to have the time to really let certain things sink in as far as what is going on. And I think that might be something that may turn off some people, and I hope it doesn't. If you really give the opportunity to just let the film sink in the way that it does, especially understanding where Liam, played by Robert Keith's character, is coming from and where he ends up, especially at the end of the movie. So there's a lot that goes on in this film, and then the exposition that you do get, it's very fitting, and you do have the time to spend with the characters as you see what they're going through on a day-to-day basis, and in breaking that monotony and having someone else into their lives that is forcing them to basically break away from that and then question certain things along the way. And we come to realize that there's a lot more complexity behind these characters that you've come to realize, because the actors, well, in this case, Robert Keith, is fantastic in this movie. The other actor I want to highlight here is Olivia Nash, who plays the character of Hannah. I'm going to be completely honest and say this here. When I first saw the movie, I thought she was a little stiff, in my opinion. I went back to watch the film, because I said earlier I watched the movie more than once. And then as I watched the movie, I started to actually appreciate the stiffness that she had for this character, because how I perceived it was this: she's on the run. When you learn about her background, how long she's been on the run for and what she had gone through, her stiffness actually, I think, worked well for the character. And seeing that she's always on guard, that she's coming to a point where I would imagine where she's just exhausted and just wants to just relax and just take a break from all the stress that she's been dealing with here. And this one guy could probably help her, and hopefully she can let her guard down a little bit and not be on the constant edge and be concerned, even though they are concerned for their lives throughout this whole story. But having a moment in that one film, as I mentioned earlier, where there's a 7-minute sequence where it's just them talking back and forth, and you can see that she still has that stiffness about her, but slowly she's letting her guard down. But you can tell that whatever trauma that she's gone through still is very much in her, and that she's still on a constant edge here. That was the perception that I got from that character with her performance in this movie, that I thought worked very effectively, because that particular sequence right there is really a very pivotal moment where the events that occur after the fact does have a much more deeper impact, and a very effective one as well too, that I think worked very well for the story. The other actor that I want to highlight here is an actor that I've become a very big fan of in Tom Hallum, who is the villain more or less in this movie, where not only does he look cool, but that's not the point though. I mean, yes, he looks cool in the movie. He definitely has this really badass look with the beard and the 5 o'clock shadow and the bleached hair, the glasses, and the biker look that he has got going on. But there's something about his performance in this movie where he really does a good job in playing a very menacing character, but also a very charming one, and at the same time, kind of like a guy that he's just on the verge of just going insane, if you will. And he definitely has brought that balance to all those different aspects of the character that I thought worked very effective, in my opinion. And then having him being the polar opposite of Liam Marshall's character, where he is a very reserved, kind of I wouldn't say stable, but just kind of just emotionless type of character. This other guy is the exact opposite. He's all over the place. He's very full of expression and very charming, whereas Liam is the opposite of all that. So I actually like that dichotomy between those two characters, where you have the wild side and you also have the more stillness, if you will, of this story. So Tom Hallum is an actor that I'm going to say this right now, that I think if given the right chance and the right opportunities, this guy can really do some amazing stuff. And he's done a lot of great, amazing stuff with Brett's film as well. One of the films I think he's at one of his absolute best is a movie called The Rodeo Thief, which I do highly recommend you guys do check out, which is also written and directed by Brett Bettman, as I mentioned earlier. That movie, I think, is really showcases a lot of character depth that he's able to pull off here. But this movie is, again, where you see the character he plays in this movie is a much more different and wild character that he does so good in this movie, in my opinion. Now, as far as the overall story is concerned, as I mentioned before, it's a very introverted story. So the more I watch this film, the more I appreciate the story, because when I saw it for the very first time, I wasn't sure if I liked it. And I don't mean that in a negative light. It's just that I wasn't really sure how I felt about the movie. But I remember distinctly thinking that I think I like it. And I even told that to Brett as well, too, and having a conversation with him. When I go back and watch it again, as I said earlier, there is a lot that I start to appreciate about this movie the more I watch it over and over again. And this is a film that I do intend on buying on DVD when it does come out. But right there, as far as the positive are concerned, there are other things I also want to highlight too, but that's going to be getting to the spoiler territory. But I'm going to say this here about the ending, which I won't reveal what it is. But when you see how the story unfolds along the way, there are certain story beats that are revealed to you as far as Hannah's background is concerned, that with the way that this movie ends, it leaves you to question what's really going to happen next and the decisions that certain characters are going to be making along the way. That makes me wonder if there's going to be a sequel for this movie, what's going to happen after that? You know, what journey these characters do take along the way, that I would be very curious to check out and see if it will ever come to fruition there. So for me, that's going to be the end of the positive here for me. But now let's get into my negatives. The first negative for me, believe it or not, actually has to do with the beginning of the movie. What I mean by that is this. I said before that it's a very slow moving movie, and the first, I would say, 10-15 minutes of the film, it is extremely slow. That's not a negative, because I think that was done for a reason. But I do remember the first time I saw it, I was watching the film and I'm thinking, is it going to be like this the entire time? Because it does take a while for things to pick up. When it does pick up, it picks up when Hannah makes her first appearance in the movie, and that's where the pace of the story starts to change, where when you start to see the characters interact with one another, it becomes more interesting. But the events leading up to that, it just takes a while to get there. But again, when I go back and watch the movie, I'm starting to appreciate that a little bit more and more the more I watch the film. But there's still a part of me that feels like it's still a little too slow for my taste. But it's not a negative, as far as I think that the decision that Brett had made in pacing it that way was wrong. I don't think that's the case at all. I really do think that when I watched the film, as I said before, it worked very well for the purpose of the story. But I still felt like it was a little too slow for my taste. So that's my first negative. The second negative actually does have to do with how I'm trying to see how I can talk about this without really revealing anything. It does have to do with one of the characters in the movie and how more or less they meet their demise. And the way that it's handled, I thought worked well, but something for me didn't really have that impact to really feel that connection of how it was supposed to be conveyed into this movie. I'm trying to figure out how I can explain here for it to make sense, to give you more context, but I'll just say that it does have to do with one of the main characters that I brought up earlier. That's all I will say about that. But the way that this one particular character meets their demise felt a little lackluster for me. Without really getting into spoilers here, the amount of time you do get to spend with this character and really understanding of their journey in the story, how they met their demise in a way just didn't really click for me all the way through. But again, when I go back and watch, I'm starting to get a better understanding about the approach of what was taken for this character's end, if you will. So I understand it. I'm starting to appreciate it, but I'm still not fully satisfied with that. But as far as everything else is concerned, as I mentioned before, I do think that some of the minor details as far as the negatives concerned are just little mundane stuff that I don't think is really worth mentioning all about here. I will point out though that there's one opening shot where you get to see the cities being overrun with water because of the meteor hedges causes massive flood, and you can still see the effects of that flood still left over from all that. And then when you go from that sequence there and you get the actual, and then more or less the actual film in itself, the tone is completely different altogether. So it almost seemed a little out of place there for me, but didn't take away from my enjoyment of the film, nor did it take me out of the movie. But I did notice a difference in tone of how you've seen this disaster that took place, and then all of a sudden you're going back and you're going into the life of Liam Marshall there, where it's the furthest from that. So something about that felt a little disconnected here for me. But apart from that, though, that was pretty much the only real problem that I have with the film, though. So now I will get into my rating. My overall thoughts on the film is that I like this movie a lot. I didn't love the film, but I liked it a lot. I know that this is not going to be a film for everybody, and I know that if you're expecting to see a disaster film, you will not get that with this movie, as I mentioned before, because there's virtually no disaster scenes in this film, with the exception of some news scenes that you get from when it occurred 10 years prior to the events of this movie, and then one particular scene where you get some fragments of meteors that kind of crash through the atmosphere every once in a while. But that's really the extent of as far as disasters are concerned. But overall, this is a very character-driven film. So I do hope that whoever comes across this movie, if they're expecting a disaster film, that they would give the story the benefit of the doubt, to really just allow the story to play itself out, to really let it sink in, and seeing the development of these characters and hearing their stories. And then when you get to the ending, it all makes sense here for you. And in turn, I hope you guys would enjoy the film as well. So for me, I would give this movie a raise a glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. If you've seen the movie, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section down below. And as of this recording, the movie is available on DVD, and I'll also be sure to have the link in the description down below where you can check out the movie for free on Tubi. And while you're there, you can also check out other films directed by Brett Bentman, such as Buckskin, Honor Among Thieves, The Roadie Thief, and many more as well too, that I highly do recommend you guys check out. And also subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already, and also make sure you share and like our videos and hit the notification bell down there. Follow us on our social media accounts on Instagram and Facebook, New Release Wednesdays, and on Twitter at @TheNRW. Follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram, Rob_Medina0585, on Twitter, RobMedina0585, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina, where my guest this week is the director of the movie Meteor, and Brett Bentman, who I had the honor and privilege to speak with here. And I'll make sure that the icon for you guys to click on for you to check out that episode. And also make sure you follow the show's social media account on Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And I want to thank you all very much for joining me here today. I hope you guys enjoy this review, and until next time, stay safe out there and